The moment Quinn Quinlan watched the young woman with ash-blonde hair slide the delicate gold ring across the pawnbroker's counter, something inside his chest cracked open like a frozen river in spring thaw. It was late March of 1884, and Fargo, North Dakota still wore the remnants of a brutal winter that had buried the Dakota Territory under snow drifts taller than horses. Quinn had ridden into town that morning with a purse heavy from selling cattle in Bismarck. His saddlebags full of supplies for the ranch he worked 30 miles south. He had stopped at Henderson's General Store to pick up salt and coffee when he noticed the pawn shop across the muddy street. And more importantly, the woman standing at its window, her thin shoulders trembling despite the wool shawl wrapped around them. She could not have been more than 22 years old, maybe younger, with a face that belonged in one of those Eastern paintings his mother used to keep above the mantel before she died. But hunger had carved hollows beneath her cheekbones, and her dress, though clean and carefully mended, hung loose on a frame that had clearly known better days. Quinn watched from the store's entrance as she stood there for what must have been 10 minutes, staring at something in her palm, before finally straightening her spine and pushing through the pawnshop door. Something told him to follow. The shop smelled of dust and desperation, packed floor to ceiling with the remnants of broken dreams. Wedding dresses, pocket watches, rifles, tools, even a child's rocking horse missing one ear. The proprietor, a man named Silas with fingers like sausages and eyes like a rat, looked up from his ledger as Quinn entered, but his attention quickly returned to the woman standing before his counter. "Please," she was saying, and her voice carried the cultured accent of someone educated back east, though it trembled now with need. "It was my mother's. The gold alone must be worth something." Silas picked up the ring, barely glancing at it before dropping it back on the counter with a dismissive clink. "Gold soft, worn thin, maybe get you 50 cents. 50 cents." The woman's voice cracked, "but it's real gold with a genuine garnet stone. My mother brought it all the way from Boston when she married my father. It has to be worth more than that. Lady, I don't care if your mama brought it from the Queen of England herself. I got a drawer full of wedding rings and baubles. Take the 50 cents or leave it." Quinn saw her hands shaking as she pressed them flat against the counter. "I need enough for bread. A week's worth of bread. The bakery wants 75 cents for a decent loaf that will last. Then go dig ditches like everyone else who needs money." "I have been looking for work every day for 3 weeks, she said, and Quinn heard the pride warring with desperation in her tone. "No one will hire a woman alone with no references in this town. Please, sir. Surely the ring is worth at least $1. Silas laughed, a sound like gravel in a bucket. 50 cents. Final offer. Take it or get out. You are not the only person in this territory going hungry." Quinn watched the exact moment she broke. Her shoulders sagged, her head bowed, and she whispered, "I will take it." As Silas counted out the coins with maddening slowness, Quinn stepped forward. "Actually," he said, his voice cutting through the shop's musty air like a clean blade, "I will give you $5 for that ring." Both Silas and the woman turned to stare at him. Up close, Quinn could see her eyes were the color of storm clouds over the prairie, gray with flecks of blue, currently wide with shock. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow and freckles scattered across her nose that her time in the harsh Dakota sun had darkened. "What?" Silas sputtered. "You heard me. $5. That's what it's worth, and we all know it." Quinn pulled a $5 gold piece from his pocket and set it on the counter with a decisive clink. "I will take the ring." "Now hold on just a minute," Silas said, his face reddening. "I already made a deal with the lady." "No, you tried to cheat her." Quinn's voice went cold as the wind outside. $5, or I tell everyone in Fargo how you swindle desperate people. See how much business you do then." For a long moment, Silas glared at him, but Quinn had 6 feet of height, shoulders built from years of ranch work, and a Colt .45 visible on his hip. The pawnbroker was a coward who preyed on the weak. He snatched up the $5 piece and shoved the ring across the counter toward Quinn with a muttered curse. Quinn picked up the delicate band, feeling the weight of it, seeing the craftsmanship Silas had been too greedy to acknowledge. The garnet gleamed like a drop of blood in the dim light. Then he turned to the woman, who was staring at him with an expression somewhere between confusion and the wary hope of someone who had been hurt too many times to trust kindness. "This belongs to you," he said quietly, holding out both the ring and the $5 gold piece. She took an involuntary step backward. "I do not understand. Your mother's ring. You should not have to sell it, and you need money for food." He kept his hand extended, steady and patient. "Please, take them both. I cannot possibly accept that." But even as she said it, her eyes kept flickering to the gold coin, and Quinn could practically see her calculating how many meals it represented, how many days she might survive. "You can, and you will." He gentled his voice the way he did with spooked horses. "Consider it a loan if that makes it easier. You can pay me back when you find work. I do not even know you, Quinn Quinlan. I work the Murphy Ranch south of here." He smiled, trying to look harmless despite his size and the gun on his hip. "And you are?" She hesitated so long he thought she might not answer. Finally, she whispered, "Abigail. Abigail Watson." "Well, Miss Watson, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Now please, take what's yours before my arm gets tired." He added a touch of humor to his voice, hoping to ease the tension that had her wound tight as a watch spring. Slowly, as if she expected him to snatch his hand back at the last moment, Abigail reached out and took the ring first. Her fingers brushed his palm, and Quinn felt that touch all the way up his arm and into his chest. She closed her hand around the gold band so tightly her knuckles went white. Then, after another moment of hesitation, she took the $5 piece as well. "Thank you," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "You have no idea what this means. I have not eaten a full meal in 4 days." The confession, clearly pulled from her against her will by sheer, overwhelming relief, made Quinn's chest tighten with anger at a world that could let someone like her go hungry, while men like Silas grew fat on others' desperation. "Then, let me buy you dinner. There is a decent place 2 doors down, and I was about to eat anyway." "Oh, I could not impose further on your generosity. It would not be an imposition. It would be me eating dinner with pleasant company instead of alone at a table like usual. Besides," he added with a grin, "I just spent my evening beer money on that ring, so you actually owe me the company to make up for my sacrifice." That startled a laugh out of her, small and rusty as an old hinge but genuine. "That is the strangest logic I have ever heard. Is that a yes?" Abigail looked down at the ring in her palm, then at the gold coin, then back up at Quinn. In her eyes, he saw her weighing pride against hunger, distrust against desperate need. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, thank you, but only if you let me pay you back somehow. We can discuss that over steak and potatoes. Come on." The restaurant, called simply the Dakota, was warm and steamy, smelling of roasted meat and fresh bread that made Abigail's stomach growl audibly as they entered. Quinn heard it and pretended he did not, asking the owner, a Swedish woman named Mrs. Lindgren, for a quiet table in the back. As they settled into their seats, Quinn ordered generously: 2 steaks, potatoes, carrots, bread, butter, coffee, and apple pie for dessert. "That is too much," Abigail protested, but without much conviction. "Nope. You said you have not eaten properly in days. You need a real meal, and so do I after that cold ride into town." When the food arrived, Quinn had to actively work not to stare as Abigail forced herself to eat slowly, her manners clearly ingrained despite her hunger. She cut her steak into precise pieces and chewed thoroughly, but he could see the effort it cost her not to simply devour everything on her plate. Between bites, he drew out her story with gentle questions, learning that she had come to Fargo 6 months ago from Boston with her father, a printer who had been promised work setting up a newspaper. "He was so excited about the opportunity," Abigail said softly, pushing a piece of potato through gravy. "A fresh start," he called it. "My mother had died 2 years earlier, and he wanted to leave the memories behind. We sold almost everything we owned to afford the train tickets west." "What happened?" Quinn asked, though the past tense in her voice already told him most of the answer. "He caught pneumonia in January. The winter here is so much harsher than Boston. We did not have proper clothing, and the room we rented had cracks in the walls that let in the wind." Her voice went flat, the way people sounded when they talked about pain too great to fully feel. "He died on Valentine's Day. I used what little money we had saved for his burial. The landlord threw me out 2 weeks ago when I could not make rent. I have been staying in a boarding house that charges by the night, but I ran out of money 3 days ago. The owner, Mrs. Thornton, let me stay anyway out of kindness, but I know she cannot keep me forever without payment. That is why I decided to sell the ring today." It was the only thing of value I had left. Quinn set down his fork, appetite suddenly gone despite the good food in front of him. "I am sorry. That is too much loss for anyone to bear, especially alone in a strange place." "Life is hard," Abigail said simply. "I learned that when my mother died. Then I learned it again when my father followed her. Now I suppose I am learning to survive despite it." "You will do more than survive." Quinn heard the conviction in his own voice and saw her look up in surprise. "You are clearly educated, well-spoken, determined. Once you get some food in you and some strength back, you will find work. This territory needs people like you. What it needs is men who can build and hunt and farm. I can do none of those things. I can read and write and do arithmetic and play piano, none of which are particularly useful skills in a frontier town." "I disagree. Fargo is growing. It will need teachers soon if it does not already, and bookkeepers and clerks. Your skills are exactly what a developing town needs." Abigail studied him across the table, her storm cloud eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he truly believed what he said or was simply being kind. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. "Helping me. You do not know me. I could be anyone, a liar or a thief or worse." "You are not, though, I can tell." When she raised a skeptical eyebrow, he elaborated. "I have worked with animals my whole life, horses and cattle mainly. You learn to read things that cannot speak, to see truth in how they move and hold themselves. People are not so different. You carry yourself like someone who has been knocked down but refuses to stay down. And you were willing to sell your mother's ring rather than steal. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. That is a lot to read from watching someone in a pawn shop. Maybe. Or maybe I just have good instincts about people." Quinn leaned back in his chair, cradling his coffee cup in both hands. "Besides, my mother raised me to help those in need when I can. She would haunt me from her grave if I saw someone struggling and just walked past." That earned him another small smile. "Your mother sounds like she was a good woman. The best. She died when I was 17. Fever took her quick." Quinn surprised himself with the admission. He did not usually talk about his mother, but something about Abigail made him want to share pieces of himself, to show her she was not alone in understanding loss. "I am sorry. Losing a parent is like losing part of yourself." "It is," he agreed. But we keep going anyway, because that is what they would want. Your father, my mother, your mother too. They would want us to keep living." Abigail was quiet for a long moment, turning her mother's ring around her finger where she had slipped it after they sat down. "I have been so focused on just surviving day to day that I forgot about actually living. Thank you for reminding me there is a difference." They talked through the rest of dinner and the pie afterward, conversation flowing easier as Abigail's initial wariness faded and food brought color back to her pale cheeks. Quinn learned she loved Charles Dickens and could recite whole passages of poetry from memory. She learned he had been born in Nebraska, but had worked ranches across 3 territories, following the cattle and the work. He told her about the vast emptiness of the prairie, the way thunderstorms rolled across it like ocean waves, and how he had once seen a herd of buffalo so large it took 3 hours to pass. She told him about Boston's cobblestone streets and gas lamps, the harbor full of ships, and how strange she found the flatness of Dakota after growing up among hills. By the time they finished eating, full dark had fallen outside, and the temperature was dropping fast the way it did on March nights when winter had not quite released its grip. Quinn paid Mrs. Lindgren and then walked Abigail back to her boarding house, a narrow 2-story building on the edge of town that had seen better days. "Thank you again," Abigail said at the door, and this time when she smiled at him, it reached her eyes. "You have given me more than food and money today. You gave me hope that there are still good people in the world." "There are more of us than it sometimes seems," Quinn assured her. "Now promise me you will use that money for food and rent and that you will keep looking for work." "I promise." "Good." He hesitated, not wanting the evening to end but knowing he had no excuse to prolong it. "I am staying in town tonight at the hotel, heading back to the ranch tomorrow. But I come to Fargo every few weeks for supplies. May I call on you again? Make sure you are doing all right." The wariness flickered back briefly in her expression, the instinct of a woman who had learned to be careful around men's intentions. But then she nodded slowly. "I would like that. As long as you understand, I cannot offer you anything except friendship in return for your kindness." "Friendship is all I am asking for," Quinn said honestly, even though something in his chest twisted at the words. From the moment he had seen her in that pawn shop, he had felt drawn to her in a way he could not fully explain. But she was vulnerable and alone, and the last thing he wanted was for her to feel pressured or indebted to him. If friendship was all she could offer, he would take it and be grateful. The next morning, Quinn stopped by the boarding house before leaving town, bringing a basket of supplies he had put together: bread, cheese, dried meat, apples, and a warm wool blanket he bought from Henderson's. Mrs. Thornton, a stout woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled into a severe bun, answered his knock. "I am looking for Miss Abigail Watson," Quinn said, removing his hat. "I have some things for her." Mrs. Thornton looked him up and down with the assessing gaze of a woman who had seen too many men take advantage of vulnerable young women. "You are the fellow she mentioned, the one who helped her yesterday." "Yes, madam. She paid me for a week's rent this morning." First time in days I have seen her smile properly. The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Wait here." She returned a moment later with Abigail, who wore the same dress as yesterday but had her hair freshly braided and pinned. Her eyes widened when she saw the basket. "I thought you could use some supplies to tide you over," Quinn explained, suddenly feeling awkward under both women's gazes. "Just some basics." "You have already done too much," Abigail protested, but her eyes lingered on the food. "Consider it a return on my investment. I need you healthy and working so you can eventually pay me back that $5, remember?" He winked to show he was teasing. Besides, I got a discount buying in bulk. You are a terrible liar, Mr. Quinlan. True enough. But you will take it anyway, right? Abigail looked at Mrs. Thornton, who gave a tiny approving nod, then back at Quinn. Yes, thank you. You have a very large heart for a cowboy. Cowboys are people too, Miss Watson. We just smell worse and have better tans. That made her laugh, and Quinn counted it a victory. I will be back in 3 weeks or so. Take care of yourself until then. The ride back to the Murphy ranch took most of the day, giving Quinn plenty of time to think about storm cloud eyes and ash blonde hair, about the cultured voice wrapped around desperate words, about the way Abigail had clutched her mother's ring like it was the only solid thing in a shifting world. He had helped people before, had been generous when he could afford it, but this felt different. She felt different. The ache in his chest when he thought about her going hungry, about her facing the harsh Dakota world alone, was not simple pity or Christian charity. It was something deeper, more personal, more dangerous. Quinn had been in love once before, or thought he had been. Her name was Sarah, and she was the daughter of a ranch owner in Wyoming. They had courted for 6 months before she made it clear that loving him meant he would need to settle down, give up the wandering life, become someone different than who he was. When he could not promise that, she married a banker instead. That had been 4 years ago, and Quinn had told himself he was better off alone, that the cowboy life was not conducive to romance and family. But now, riding across the muddy spring prairie under a sky so vast it hurt to look at, he wondered if maybe he had just been waiting for the right person to make settling down feel like a choice instead of a sacrifice. The Murphy Ranch was a sprawling operation with over 3,000 head of cattle, 20 horses, and 5 permanent hands including Quinn. The owner, Thomas Murphy, was a gruff Irish immigrant who had come west 30 years earlier with nothing and built an empire through sheer stubbornness and hard work. He paid well and treated his men fairly, and Quinn had been with him for 3 years, longer than he had stayed anywhere else. When Quinn rode into the ranch yard that evening, Murphy himself came out of the main house, a broad-shouldered man gone gray at the temples, smoking a pipe that never seemed to leave his mouth. "You took your sweet time," Murphy called out. "Was starting to think you decided to stay in town and enjoy civilization. Just got delayed a bit. I have your supplies." Quinn swung down from his horse and started unloading the saddlebags. "Everything here." Murphy peered into one of the bags, then grunted approval. "Good. We are moving the herd to the north pasture tomorrow. Grass is finally starting to green up out there. I will need you and Charlie to ride point." "Yes, sir." Murphy studied him with shrewd eyes. "You look like something is on your mind. Woman trouble. What makes you say that?" "Because you have that dumb look men get when they are thinking about a female. I have been married 30 years. I know the signs." Murphy grinned around his pipe. "Anyone I know, doubt it, met her in town. She was in a bad situation and I helped her out." "Helped her how?" Quinn explained the situation at the pawn shop, leaving out some details but giving enough that Murphy understood. When he finished, the older man shook his head with a knowing smile. "Boy, you are either the noblest fool in Dakota territory or you just met your future wife. Maybe both." "I barely know her." "That is what I said about Margaret when I saw her getting off the wagon train in Omaha, married 3 months later, and it has been the best decision I ever made." Murphy clapped him on the shoulder. "If she matters, do not let her slip away. Good women are rarer than gold out here." Over the next 3 weeks, Quinn threw himself into work with perhaps more intensity than necessary, trying not to count down the days until he had an excuse to return to Fargo. They moved the cattle, repaired fences damaged by winter storms, broke 2 new horses, and dealt with a pack of wolves that got brave enough to test the herd's defenses. Through it all, Quinn found his thoughts drifting back to Abigail, wondering if she had found work, if she was eating properly, if she was safe. He told himself his concern was simply human decency, that he would care about anyone he had helped. But late at night in the bunkhouse, listening to the other hands snore, he admitted the truth. He was falling for a woman he had spent only a few hours with, a woman who had made it clear she could offer nothing but friendship. It was foolish and impractical and completely unlike his usual careful approach to life. It was also utterly undeniable. When supply day finally came, Quinn volunteered before Murphy could even ask. Charlie, one of the other hands, gave him a knowing look but said nothing. Quinn made the ride to Fargo in record time, pushing his horse harder than he probably should have, arriving in town by mid-afternoon with his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. He went to the boarding house first, barely pausing to tie up his horse. Mrs. Thornton answered his knock again, and this time her smile was immediate and genuine. Mr. Quinlan, Abigail will be pleased to see you. Come in. The interior of the boarding house was threadbare but clean, with a narrow staircase leading to the upper floor. Mrs. Thornton gestured for him to wait in the small parlor while she went to fetch Abigail. Quinn stood by the window, hat in hands, trying to calm his nerves and feeling ridiculous about the whole thing. He was 26 years old and had faced down stampedes and blizzards and angry drunk cowboys with guns. He should not be this nervous about seeing a woman again. Then Abigail appeared in the doorway, and every thought fled his mind. She had gained weight, he noticed immediately. Not much, but enough that her cheekbones were no longer quite so sharp, her wrists no longer quite so delicate. She wore a different dress, a simple calico in pale blue that was still worn but fit her better than the brown one had. Her hair was pinned up in a style that showed the elegant line of her neck. But what struck him most was the light in her eyes, the absence of that desperate, hunted look that had haunted her before. "Quinn," she said, and the genuine warmth in her voice sent heat through his chest. "I was hoping you would come today. Mrs. Thornton said it had been 3 weeks, so I thought perhaps today or tomorrow. I came as soon as I could get away from the ranch." He realized he was staring and forced himself to look away to take a breath. "You look well." "I am well. So much has happened since you left. Come, sit down. Do you have time? Or do you need to get your supplies and return right away?" "I have time," Quinn said immediately, even though he probably should have stopped at the general store first. "Tell me everything." They sat in the small parlor, and Abigail launched into her news with an animation that transformed her face. 2 days after Quinn left, she had gone to the new church being built on the north side of town and asked the minister if he knew of anyone needing help. The minister's wife, it turned out, was looking for someone to assist in starting a school. Fargo had enough children now to warrant proper education, and the town council had finally allocated funds for a teacher. They could not afford 2 teachers, Abigail explained, her hands moving expressively as she talked. So Mrs. Brennan, the minister's wife, is the main teacher. But she needed an assistant to help with the younger children, to prepare materials, and to teach reading and arithmetic basics. The pay is not much, only $3 a week, but it is steady work. I started 10 days ago. Abigail, that is wonderful. Quinn felt pride swell in his chest as if her success was somehow his own. I told you your skills were exactly what this town needed. You did, and you were right. She ducked her head, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. I kept thinking about what you said, about doing more than just surviving. It gave me courage to keep trying instead of giving up. So thank you. Again, I seem to say that a lot to you. You can thank me by showing me you are taking care of yourself. Are you eating properly? You have a safe place to stay? Yes to both. Mrs. Thornton has been very kind. With my wages, I can afford my room and food. I even bought a new dress. She plucked at the blue calico self-consciously. Well, new to me. From the second-hand shop. But it fits properly, which is a luxury. It is a good color on you, Quinn said, then immediately felt his face heat. That was too forward, too revealing of feelings she had not asked for, but Abigail just smiled, a pleased, almost shy expression. Thank you. Blue was my mother's favorite color. She would have liked this dress. They talked for over an hour, conversation flowing as easily as it had over dinner 3 weeks ago. Abigail told him about the children she taught, their eagerness to learn despite the rough conditions of the makeshift schoolhouse. Quinn told her about the wolf pack and breaking horses, about the way the prairie looked in early spring when the first green pushed through the dead grass. He did not mention how often he had thought about her, or how her face had appeared in his dreams, or how the 3 weeks apart had felt like 3 months. Finally, reluctantly, he said, I should get the supplies and start back. It is a long ride and I do not want to be on the trail after full dark. Of course. Abigail walked him to the door, then hesitated, her hand on the frame. Will you come back? Or was this just to check on me, and now that you see I am fine, you will not need to anymore? The uncertainty in her voice made Quinn's decision easy. I will come back. Every time I am in town if you will have me. I would like that very much. This time when Quinn left Fargo, his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He whistled as he loaded supplies onto his horse, drawing curious looks from other townspeople. He did not care. Abigail was safe, healthy, working, and she wanted to see him again. For now, that was enough. But as spring rolled into summer across the Dakota Territory, enough began to feel insufficient. Quinn made the trip to Fargo every 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes with legitimate supply needs, sometimes inventing reasons to go. Each visit, he and Abigail spent hours together, walking around the town, having meals, sitting by the red river that wound through the landscape, talking about everything and nothing. He learned she missed the ocean from her Boston childhood, the smell of salt air and the cry of gulls. He told her about growing up in Nebraska, about his father who had died when Quinn was 12, kicked by a horse he was trying to break. She shared memories of her mother, a gentle woman who loved gardening and baking bread. He confessed his fear of deep water, stemming from nearly drowning in a river crossing when he was young. With each visit, the pull between them grew stronger, more undeniable. Quinn saw it in the way Abigail's face lit up when he arrived, in how she found excuses to touch his arm when they talked, in the way her eyes followed him when she thought he was not looking. He felt it in the ache in his chest when he had to leave, in how empty the ranch felt when he returned, in how her laugh had become his favorite sound in the world. But neither of them spoke of it. Abigail had been clear about friendship, and Quinn respected that boundary even as he longed to cross it. She was building a new life, establishing herself in Fargo, and he refused to complicate that or make her feel pressured. So he swallowed his feelings and treasured the friendship she offered, telling himself it was enough even when his heart insisted otherwise. Then came the afternoon in late July when everything changed. Quinn arrived in Fargo to find the town in an uproar. A fire had broken out the previous night in one of the warehouses near the railroad depot, spreading to 3 adjacent buildings before being brought under control. No one had died, thankfully, but several families had lost their homes and possessions. The town was organizing relief efforts, collecting food and clothing and money to help those displaced. He found Abigail at the schoolhouse, which had been converted into a temporary shelter. She was helping sort donated items, her hair escaping its pins, a smudge of ash on her cheek. When she saw him, relief flooded her features. "Quinn, thank God. I was hoping you would come today. We need all the help we can get." He rolled up his sleeves. "Put me to work." For the next 6 hours, Quinn hauled water, moved furniture, helped construct temporary partitions for privacy, and listened to stories of narrow escapes and lost treasures. He worked alongside Abigail, their shoulders brushing, falling into an easy rhythm of cooperation. At one point, he looked over to see her comforting a crying child, her voice soft and soothing, and something in his chest clenched so hard he had to stop and catch his breath. He loved her. Not the infatuation of new attraction, but the deep, bone-certain knowledge that she was the person he wanted beside him through all of life's joys and hardships. He loved her strength and her kindness, her resilience and her vulnerability, the way she had survived loss without becoming bitter, the way she gave to others despite having so little herself. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like finally admitting something he had known since the moment he saw her in that pawnshop 4 months ago. By the time the work wound down, evening had fallen, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Quinn found Abigail sitting on the schoolhouse steps, looking exhausted. "You should eat something," he said, settling beside her. "So should you. When did either of us last have a meal this morning for me?" "You, the same." She leaned her head back against the railing and closed her eyes. Today was awful and wonderful all at once. Awful because of what happened to those families, wonderful because of how everyone came together to help. That is humanity for you, capable of both tremendous destruction and tremendous compassion, sometimes on the same day. Abigail opened her eyes and turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful in the fading light. "You are a good man, Quinn Quinlan. I hope you know that. I try to be. No, I mean it. You dropped everything to help today, people you do not even know. You gave up your whole day. So did you. It is different. I live here. These are my neighbors, but you rode 30 miles and now you will have to ride 30 miles back in the dark, all to help strangers." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. "You have a generous heart. I noticed it the first day we met, and I have seen it proven true every time since." Quinn looked down at their joined hands, his pulse suddenly racing. "Abigail, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" The words stuck in his throat, years of caution and self-protection warring with the need to be honest. But then he remembered what Murphy had said. If she matters, do not let her slip away. And he thought about Sarah, about how his fear of vulnerability had cost him that relationship, and he decided that whatever Abigail's response, he would rather risk rejection than live with regret. These past few months, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has meant more to me than I know how to express. You have become the best part of my days, the thing I look forward to, the person I want to share everything with. And I know you said you could only offer friendship, and if that is still true, I will respect it and be grateful for whatever you can give. But I need you to know that somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. Completely, irreversibly in love with you." Abigail went very still, her hand frozen in his. In the twilight, he could not read her expression clearly, and panic started to creep up his spine. He had ruined everything, pushed too hard, asked for more than she could give. Then she said, very quietly, "I told you I could only offer friendship because I was terrified." Terrified of what? Of needing someone again. Of depending on someone and then losing them like I lost my parents. Of being that vulnerable. She squeezed his hand tightly. "But the truth is, I have been falling in love with you too, almost from the beginning. Every time you visited, every conversation, every moment together, I fell a little more. I tried to fight it, tried to convince myself it was just gratitude or loneliness or anything except what it actually was. But I cannot pretend anymore. I love you, Quinn. I love you, and it terrifies me. Quinn felt like he might float off the steps and into the darkening sky. It terrifies me too, he admitted. But I think being terrified together is better than being safe and alone. Yes, Abigail said. And then she was leaning forward and he was meeting her halfway, and they were kissing on the schoolhouse steps with the smell of smoke still in the air, and the sounds of the town settling around them. Her lips were soft and slightly chapped, and she tasted like hope in coming home, and Quinn knew with absolute certainty that this was what he had been searching for in all his wandering years. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Abigail laughed breathlessly. Well, that was worth being terrified for. We should probably talk about what this means, Quinn said, trying to be practical even though his heart was doing cartwheels in his chest. I live 30 miles from here. My work is at the ranch. Your work is in town. The logistics are complicated. Then we will figure out the logistics. Abigail cupped his face in both her hands, her storm cloud eyes fierce and determined. I did not survive everything I have survived only to give up on something this important because it is complicated. We will find a way. So they did. Over the following weeks, they carved out a relationship from the challenging circumstances. Quinn visiting whenever possible, sometimes staying overnight at the boarding house under Mrs. Thornton's watchful but approving eye. On the weeks he could not get away, they wrote letters, pages and pages of thoughts and feelings and daily details that made the distance more bearable. In late August, Quinn spoke to Murphy about his situation. The older man listened, puffing on his eternal pipe, then said, I wondered when you would get around to this conversation. You have been useless as a ranch hand ever since you met that girl, mooning around like a lovesick calf. I have not been that bad, Quinn protested. You rode into a fence post last week because you were not paying attention. You have been exactly that bad. But Murphy was grinning. Here is what I propose. Winter is coming and work will slow down considerably. Why do not you take November through March off, move into town, court your girl properly? Come spring, we will figure out something more permanent. Maybe you work here during busy season and do odd jobs in town the rest of the year. We will make it work. You would do that for me. You have been a good hand for 3 years and a loyal one. Besides, Margaret has been nagging me about being more romantic, apparently helping young love counts in the romance column. Murphy clapped him on the shoulder. Go get your girl, Quinn. Life is too short, and the frontier is too harsh to waste time when you find something good. When Quinn told Abigail about Murphy's offer, she cried happy tears and kissed him until they both forgot where they were, earning scandalized looks from passing townspeople. They made plans for him to move to Fargo in November, to rent a room near the boarding house, to spend the winter together without the constant pressure of distance and separation. But fate, as it often does, had different plans. In early September, Quinn was helping move cattle when a sudden storm blew in with the violence only prairie thunderstorms could achieve. Lightning struck close enough that Quinn felt the hair on his arms stand up, and the entire herd spooked, 3,000 head of cattle suddenly running in blind panic. Quinn's horse reared, throwing him hard enough that he saw stars, and then there was just chaos and noise and the thunder of hooves all around him. He woke up 2 days later in the Murphy ranch house with a doctor sitting beside his bed. His left leg was broken in 2 places, he had cracked 3 ribs, and his head had taken a blow that left him dizzy and confused. But he was alive, which the doctor said was a minor miracle considering he had nearly been trampled by the stampede. You will recover, the doctor said, But it will take time, that leg especially. You will be laid up for at least 2 months, maybe longer." Quinn's first coherent thought was of Abigail. His second was frustration at the unfairness of finally having a plan and then having it literally knocked out from under him. Murphy's wife, Margaret, a practical woman with a kind face, patted his hand. "We have sent word to your young lady," she said. "She knows what happened and that you are alive. I expect she will want to come see you. She should not. It is too far and she has her work at the school." "That is for her to decide, not you," Margaret said firmly. "Now rest. You need to heal." Abigail arrived 3 days later, having convinced Mrs. Brennan to manage the school alone for a few days. When she walked into Quinn's room, still dusty from the road, her face tight with worry, Quinn felt his throat close with emotion. "You foolish, reckless man," she said, but her voice broke on the words. She crossed to his bedside and took his hand carefully, mindful of his injuries. "You could have died, but I did not. But you could have." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "And I would have lost you before we even had a chance to properly start our life together. Abigail, I am sorry. I know this ruins our plans for the winter. Plans can change." She wiped her eyes with her free hand, straightening her shoulders in that gesture he had come to recognize as her marshaling her strength. "What matters is that you are alive and you will recover. The rest we can figure out." She stayed for 2 days, sitting by his bedside, talking to keep him company, helping Margaret with cooking and cleaning to earn her keep. When she had to return to Fargo, she kissed him gently, mindful of his bruised ribs. "I will come back as often as I can," she promised. "And you focus on healing. We have the rest of our lives ahead of us. A few months of waiting will not change that." But a few months turned into a longer ordeal than anyone anticipated. Quinn's leg was not healing properly, the bone not setting right despite the doctor's best efforts. By October, it was clear he would need surgery, which meant a trip to Bismarck, where there was a hospital with a trained surgeon. The surgery went well, but recovery added another 6 weeks to his timeline. Christmas came and went with Quinn still on crutches, still unable to put full weight on his leg, still frustrated by his body's refusal to cooperate with his will. Through it all, Abigail wrote faithfully, letters arriving every few days like clockwork. She told him about the school, about students learning their letters, about the first real snow of the season. She reminded him that she loved him, that she was waiting, that nothing would change how she felt. Quinn clung to those letters like lifelines, reading them over and over until the paper wore thin at the creases. It was not until late January of 1885, nearly 5 months after the accident, that Quinn was finally cleared to travel. His leg was healed, though he walked with a slight limp the doctor said would fade with time. He was thinner than before, his muscles atrophied from months of inactivity. But he was whole and mobile and desperate to see Abigail. Murphy loaned him a wagon for the trip, since long rides on horseback were still not advisable. Quinn made the journey to Fargo in a single day, pushing through the cold, arriving after dark with his hands nearly frozen to the reins despite thick gloves. He went straight to the boarding house, not even stopping to find a room for himself. Mrs. Thornton answered his knock, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Mr. Quinlan, we have been expecting you. Come in before you freeze." She ushered him inside, taking his coat and hat. "Abigail is upstairs. Let me fetch her." But before she could move, Abigail appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the sound of voices. When she saw Quinn, she made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she was running down the stairs and into his arms with enough force that he staggered backward. "Careful," he said, laughing, wrapping his arms around her and burying his face in her hair. "I am still somewhat breakable." I do not care, I am never letting you go again. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her hands framing his face. You look terrible. You look beautiful. Liar, but I love you anyway. And then she was kissing him, and Quinn forgot about the cold and the pain and the lost months, lost in the warmth of her mouth and the solid reality of her in his arms. Mrs. Thornton cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps you two would like some privacy. The parlor is empty. They sat together on the worn sofa, pressed close, hands intertwined, catching up on everything letters could not convey. Quinn told her about the surgery, about the slow frustration of recovery, about how Murphy had held his job but said Quinn should take as much time as he needed. Abigail told him about the school expanding, about 2 more students joining, about how Mrs. Brennan had said she was doing excellent work. I have been thinking, Abigail said slowly, about the future, about us. So have I. I have had a lot of time to think these past months. I want to marry you, she said, direct and clear. I know we have only been courting since July and perhaps we should wait longer to be proper, but I am tired of waiting. I am tired of being apart. I want to build a life with you, Quinn. However that looks, whatever we have to do to make it work. Quinn felt joy explode in his chest like fireworks. I want that too. I have wanted it since the day I met you, if I am being honest. I just did not want to rush you. Then do not rush me. Ask me properly. He laughed, then carefully lowered himself to one knee, his still healing leg protesting but holding. From his pocket, he drew out a small box he had been carrying since December, since he had known he was going to survive and recover. Inside was a ring, simple gold with a small diamond, nothing fancy but the best he could afford. Abigail Watson, you are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You survived loss that would have broken most people. You built a new life from nothing but determination and hope, and somehow, impossibly, you chose to love me. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Abigail said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, glinting in the lamplight. Then he stood, kissing her again, and Mrs. Thornton appeared in the doorway with a bottle of wine and 3 glasses. I thought we might celebrate, the older woman said, beaming. It is not every day we have an engagement in this house. They were married 6 weeks later in early March of 1885 in the same church where Abigail worked. The ceremony was small, just a handful of people. Mrs. Thornton and Mrs. Brennan, Murphy and his wife Margaret, a few of the other ranch hands and some of Abigail's students with their parents. Abigail wore a new dress, this one purchased rather than second-hand, in cream-colored silk that Margaret had helped her sew. Quinn wore his best suit, hair slicked back, so nervous his hands shook when he took Abigail's during the vows. Do you, Quinn Quinlan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do, Quinn said, his voice strong and sure. And do you, Abigail Watson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do, Abigail said, her storm cloud eyes locked on his. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Dakota, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Quinn did, thoroughly, earning applause and a few good-natured catcalls from the assembled guests. When they pulled apart, Abigail was smiling so wide it looked like her face might split, and Quinn felt a happiness so complete it was almost frightening in its intensity. They had dinner at the Dakota, the same restaurant where they had shared their first meal. Mrs. Lindgren had prepared a feast: roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables, and a cake she had baked special for the occasion. Toasts were made, stories told, laughter shared. Murphy stood and cleared his throat. I have known Quinn for 3 years, and in that time, I have watched him grow from a wandering cowboy into a man with purpose and direction. Abigail, you have given him that. You have given him a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting. And Quinn, you have given Abigail safety and love and partnership. I have no doubt you two will build a good life together. To the bride and groom. To the bride and groom, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Quinn had rented a small house on the outskirts of Fargo, a 2-room cabin that needed work but had good bones and a nice view of the prairie stretching to the horizon. Murphy had given him a bonus as a wedding present, enough to buy basic furniture and supplies. It was not much, but it was theirs, the first real home Quinn had ever had. That night, as they lay together in the narrow bed, listening to the wind howl across the prairie, Abigail traced the scar on Quinn's leg from the surgery, her touch gentle. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. "Sometimes. But it is getting better. The doctor said by summer I should be back to normal. What will we do? You cannot work the ranch full-time if we are living here, and I cannot give up the school. Not yet, anyway. We need my income. I talked to Murphy about that. He suggested I work as a traveling hand, hired for specific jobs across multiple ranches as needed. It is common enough. I would be gone sometimes, maybe a week or 2 at a time, but I would be home more than if I was working one ranch permanently. And in between jobs, I can do work around town. There is always need for someone who can handle horses and do general labor." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "Will that be enough for you? I know you love the ranch life." "I love you more," Quinn said simply. "The ranch is work. You are my life. That is an easy choice." She kissed him, slow and deep, and for a while they forgot about work and money and the future, lost in the present moment and each other. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment, learning to share space and lives, to navigate the realities of being partners rather than courting sweethearts. Quinn found work easily enough, his reputation as a skilled hand spreading across the territory. Sometimes he was gone for a week, helping with a cattle drive or breaking horses at a distant ranch. Other times he was home for weeks at a stretch, helping around their property, doing odd jobs in town, walking Abigail to school in the mornings like a lovesick boy despite being a married man. They had fights, of course, about money when times got lean in the winter, about Quinn taking risks after he came home with bruised ribs from a bronco that got the better of him, about Abigail working herself to exhaustion at the school, refusing to slow down even when she was clearly tired. But they always talked through it, always found their way back to each other, learning that love was not just the easy moments but the choice to stay and work through the hard ones. In the spring of 1886, Abigail discovered she was pregnant. She told Quinn one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I am going to have a baby," she said, and her voice carried equal parts joy and terror. Quinn turned to her, not quite comprehending. "A baby, our baby?" "Yes. I am about 2 months along, I think. The doctor confirmed it today." He pulled her into his arms, careful and reverent, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "That is wonderful. That is amazing. We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Abigail asked, her face pressed against his chest. "I know we did not exactly plan this. Money is already tight. Happy does not begin to cover it. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once." He pulled back to look at her face. "We will figure out the money. We always do. But a baby, Abigail, a child who is half you and half me. There is nothing in this world I want more." Their son was born in November of 1886, during the first snowstorm of the season. The labor was long and difficult, and Quinn spent 14 hours pacing outside the bedroom while the midwife and Mrs. Thornton attended to Abigail. When he finally heard the baby's cry, thin and reedy but unmistakably alive, he sagged against the wall in relief. The midwife emerged, a capable woman named Mrs. Schultz, with a smile on her weathered face. "You have a healthy boy, Mr. Quinlan, and your wife did beautifully. You can come in now." Quinn entered the bedroom to find Abigail propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he approached, tears streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said softly. Quinn sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking from the blankets. The baby had wisps of dark hair like his and delicate features like Abigail. His eyes were squeezed shut, little fists waving in the air. "He is perfect," Quinn whispered, afraid that speaking too loud might break the spell of the moment. "You are perfect. I cannot believe you made this." "We made this," Abigail corrected. "Together." They named him Thomas after Murphy, with the middle name James for Abigail's father. Thomas James Quinlan, and he had his mother's storm cloud eyes and his father's stubborn determination, evident from the way he latched on when nursing, and the volume of his cries when displeased. Parenthood was harder than either of them anticipated. Thomas did not sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch for the first 3 months, leaving both Quinn and Abigail walking around in a fog of exhaustion. Money was tighter than ever, with an extra mouth to feed and Abigail unable to work for several months after the birth. Quinn took every job offered, sometimes working 16-hour days, coming home so tired he could barely stand. But there were moments of pure magic too. The first time Thomas smiled, a genuine gummy grin directed at his father, the way he calmed instantly when Quinn sang to him in a rumbling bass. How Abigail looked rocking him at night, lamplight turning her hair to gold, her face soft with a love so fierce it was almost frightening. By the time Thomas was a year old, things had stabilized. Abigail returned to teaching part-time, bringing Thomas with her since he was still nursing. The school had grown enough that they now had 3 teachers, and Abigail's role had expanded to include managing the curriculum. Quinn had built a reputation as one of the most reliable hands in the territory, which meant steadier work and better pay. They moved to a larger house in town, this one with 3 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Quinn built furniture in his spare time, solid pieces that would last generations. Abigail planted a garden, growing vegetables and herbs, trying to recreate the garden her mother had kept in Boston. They attended church on Sundays, had dinner with friends, became part of the community in a way Quinn had never experienced before. In the summer of 1888, Abigail became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, her body knowing what to expect. Their daughter was born in February of 1889, another difficult winter birth, but without complications. They named her Margaret Ann, after Murphy's wife and Abigail's mother. Margaret was different from Thomas from the start, quieter, more observant, with Abigail's ash-blonde hair and Quinn's strong jaw. She rarely cried, instead watching the world with solemn eyes as if taking its measure before deciding how to engage with it. With 2 children, life became beautifully chaotic. Quinn cut back on traveling work, taking mostly local jobs so he could be home every night. Money was perpetually tight, but they always had enough. Food on the table, clothes on their backs, a warm home, and love in abundance. One evening in the spring of 1890, after the children were asleep, Abigail found the small wooden box where she kept her most precious possessions. From it, she drew out her mother's ring, the garnet gleaming in the lamplight. "I was thinking about the day we met," she said, turning the ring slowly. "How desperate I was, how certain I was that my life was over. I was going to sell this ring for 50 cents and bread. That was the entirety of my ambition that day. Just survive one more week." Quinn came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "And instead, you got a busybody cowboy who could not mind his own business." "I got a miracle," Abigail corrected, leaning back into his embrace. "I got a second chance at life, a family, a home, love, all because you saw someone in need and helped without expecting anything in return." "I got the better end of that deal," Quinn said. $5 and a ring in exchange for the best thing that ever happened to me. That is the definition of a bargain." She turned in his arms, looping her hands behind his neck. "Do you remember what you said that day? That I should not have to sell my mother's ring, that it belonged to me. I remember. I want to give it to Margaret when she is grown, pass it down the way my mother gave it to me. It survived my darkest moment because of you, and now it can be a symbol of hope and new beginnings for our daughter." Quinn kissed her forehead. "That sounds perfect. Your mother would have loved that." "She would have loved you," Abigail said. "My father, too. They would have been so happy to see what we built together." Over the years, their family continued to grow and flourish. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and animals in equal measure. Margaret was quieter, spending hours drawing pictures of the prairie and the sky, showing an artistic talent neither parent could claim. In 1892, they had another son, naming him Samuel Quinn Quinlan. In 1895, a second daughter arrived, Catherine Rose. Quinn's work evolved as he aged. By his mid-30s, the physical demands of ranch work were taking a toll on his body, especially his old leg injury that ached in cold weather. He transitioned to working primarily with horses, training and trading them, a skill that required expertise more than brute strength. He built a small stable behind their house, and his reputation grew. People came from across the territory to buy Quinn Quinlan horses, knowing they were getting an animal that was properly trained, well-treated, and reliable. Abigail became the head teacher at the school when Mrs. Brennan retired in 1893. She developed a curriculum that became a model for other schools in the territory. She taught hundreds of children to read and write, giving them tools to build better lives. Former students would return years later with their own children, thanking her for the education that had opened doors. They had struggles, of course. Years when money was impossibly tight, when drought killed the garden and Quinn's work dried up. Illnesses that scared them, though thankfully none fatal. The normal wear and tear of life, of bills and repairs and worries about children. But through it all, they had each other, and that made everything bearable. On their 10th wedding anniversary in March of 1895, Quinn took Abigail to the pawn shop where they had first met. It was still there, though Silas had died 3 years earlier and the shop now belonged to his nephew, a much more honest man. "Why are we here?" Abigail asked, confused. "Because this is where our story started, where I saw you and knew, even though I did not understand it at the time, that you were going to change my life." Quinn took her hand, lacing their fingers together the way he had that first evening at the restaurant. "I wanted to come back and remember. To honor the people we were that day, scared and alone and desperate. They deserve to be remembered because they survived and fought and became us." Abigail wiped her eyes, smiling through tears. "How did I get so lucky to find you? I think luck had nothing to do with it. I think sometimes the universe puts people in the right place at the right time, and then it is up to us to be brave enough to act on it." He pulled her close, holding her in the middle of the street, not caring who saw. "I am glad I was brave that day." "So am I," Abigail whispered. So am I. They walked home through the evening streets of Fargo, a town that had grown from a rough frontier settlement into a proper city. Gas lamps lined the streets now. New buildings replaced old ones. The railroad brought more people every day. But through all the changes, some things remained constant. Love, family, the choice to help someone in need, the courage to accept help when offered. As they reached their house, they could hear their children inside, Thomas reading to his younger siblings, their voices drifting through the open window along with Margaret's laughter. Quinn paused at the gate, looking at the home they had built, the life they had created. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I had walked past that pawnshop without stopping?" he asked. "No," Abigail said firmly. "Because you did not walk past. You stopped. You helped. You changed everything. There is no point wondering about the paths not taken when the path we chose led us here." She was right, of course. She usually was. Quinn opened the gate, and they walked up the path together, hand in hand, ready to join their children and continue the beautiful, messy, miraculous life they had built from a single act of kindness in a dingy pawn shop 6 years ago. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of a life well lived. Their children grew and changed. Thomas, serious and studious, announced at 16 that he wanted to be a veterinarian, inspired by years of watching his father work with horses. They sent him to study in Minneapolis, scraping together tuition through sacrifices and savings, proud beyond words when he came home with his degree and opened a practice in Fargo. Margaret pursued her art, selling paintings of the prairie and sky that captured something essential about the harsh beauty of the Dakota landscape. She married a kind man named Peter who worked at the bank, and they built a house 2 streets over from Quinn and Abigail. Samuel followed his father into the horse business, showing a natural talent that exceeded even Quinn's considerable skill. Catherine became a teacher like her mother, taking over Abigail's role at the school when Abigail finally retired at age 55. Quinn and Abigail grew old together, their faces weathering like the wood of their house, bodies slowing but spirits still strong. They sat on their porch on summer evenings, watching grandchildren play in the yard, telling stories of the old days when Fargo was barely more than a trading post, and the prairie was wild and untamed. On a summer evening in 1910, Quinn sat in his favorite rocking chair, the one he had built 30 years earlier that had molded to his shape over decades of use. Abigail sat beside him in her own chair, working on a piece of embroidery while their youngest grandchild, Margaret's daughter Emma, played at their feet. "Tell me again about how you met Grandma," Emma said, looking up with eyes that were the same storm cloud color as Abigail's had been before age faded them. Quinn smiled, the story one he had told 100 times but never tired of telling. "Well, it was a cold day in March, and I saw your grandmother selling something very precious at a pawn shop because she needed money for food. And you bought it for her," Emma prompted, knowing the story by heart but wanting to hear it again anyway. "I did. A beautiful ring her mother had given her. And then I gave her both the ring and the money because I could not stand to see her go hungry. And then you fell in love," Emma sighed dramatically, in the way of 9-year-old girls everywhere. "And then we fell in love," Abigail confirmed, reaching over to squeeze Quinn's hand, "though it took us a little while to admit it." "Why?" Emma asked. "Because love can be scary," Quinn explained. "It means risking getting hurt. It means trusting someone with your heart. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need someone and let them in." Emma thought about that seriously. "But you were brave." "We were," Abigail agreed, "and it was the best decision we ever made." As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. Quinn looked at his wife, seeing past the gray hair and wrinkles to the desperate young woman in the pawn shop, the determined widow who refused to give up, the radiant bride, the fierce mother, the wise grandmother. He saw all the versions of her at once, layered like the rings of a tree, each one precious and essential to the whole. "No regrets," he said softly. "Not a single one," Abigail replied, and her smile held all the warmth of their decades together. Quinn Quinlan died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1918, at the age of 60. Abigail held his hand as he went, telling him she loved him one last time, promising to follow when her own time came. She lived another 7 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, before joining Quinn in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Fargo. Their children buried them side by side beneath a simple stone that read, "Quinn and Abigail Quinlan." They found each other. They built a life. They loved well. And in Margaret's jewelry box, passed down through generations of daughters, sat a delicate gold ring with a garnet stone, its story told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the entire trajectory of a life. That love can grow from desperation into something beautiful and lasting. That two people who are alone can build a family that echoes through the years. The ring had survived poverty and loss, had been nearly sold for 50 cents and bread, had been bought back by a cowboy who saw someone in need and chose to help. It had witnessed a love story for the ages, had been there for the beginning and was treasured through to the end. And it carried forward the lesson Quinn and Abigail had learned and lived, that we are at our best when we lift each other up, that love is always worth the risk, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we almost lose but fight to keep. Years later, when Emma was grown and had a daughter of her own, she placed that same ring on her daughter's finger and told the story once more. About a cowboy and a desperate young woman. About kindness given freely and love grown deep. About the day in a pawn shop in Fargo, North Dakota in 1884, when two lonely people found each other and decided to be brave. And the story lived on, passed down through the generations, a testament to the truth that love, once given, never truly dies. It echoes forward through time, in the children raised and the kindnesses offered, and the lives built on the foundation of two people who chose each other, again and again, through all the beautiful and difficult days of their shared life. The sun rose and set over the Dakota prairie. Seasons changed, towns grew and technologies advanced, but some things remained eternal: love, family. The memory of a cowboy who saw a woman selling her mother's ring for bread, bought it back, and gave her both, changing two lives forever and creating a legacy that would endure far beyond their years. That was the truest kind of magic, the kind that needed no embellishment or exaggeration, because the simple truth of it was already extraordinary. And so their story ended, not with tragedy or heartbreak, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well loved, and a legacy that would continue as long as there were people who believed that kindness matters, that love conquers, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of compassion in a dusty pawn shop on a cold March day.